Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Tonight, third-wave feminism continues to sweep the country and has even poisoned the U.S. military as U.S. Army cadets are forced to wear high heels. I wonder what ISIS or the Russian military thinks about that. Can't be good. Plus, the man who was viciously beaten by cops after a chase on horseback receives a $650,000 settlement. And the VA is caught sending veterans' private medical information to the FBI. All that plus much more up next on the Infowars Nightly News.
Over the past year, we've had countless examples of police brutality. And while these things continue to happen, there's finally actually something being done about this. We see officers fired, suspended, and sometimes even settlements for those people who are victimized, as is the case that happened recently. A man stole a horse, which was a capital offense back in the day, so I can't give the guy too much slack on that. But this is Francis Jared Husak. He fled with a horse, a stolen horse, and was then, I guess you'd say, attacked by some deputies out in the woods. Now the man did give up. He didn't want to further agitate the officers. The officers tased the man and beat the man pretty much to a bloody pulp. But the gentleman is receiving a $650,000 settlement. And while I am glad that he is receiving a settlement, I wish it wouldn't have happened in the first place, I guess is the best way to say that. Because this comes out of the pocket of the taxpayer. So if you live in this man's county, you are footing the bill for this. It's not coming out of the police department or other areas. It's coming out of the local taxpayer. And as I was saying earlier, I wish these incidents would not happen. Once again, this guy was stealing a horse, which was a capital offense years back. But we need to find some way, a happy medium, to get rid of these things. Because whether it's Eric Gardner or any number of these guys, there's so many, Kelly Thomas, another guy as well. At least when we get these guys on camera now, something is actually happening. Because we heard all the talk and all the rhetoric talking about how we need to put body cameras on these officers. They're rejecting the notion here in the city of Austin, Texas. They say that, it's impeding people's privacy and all these other things, even though if you go downtown, they have cameras on every street corner watching everything you do. But if you want to record the officer in the commission of the duty, they act like there's something weird or inappropriate about that. But long story short, we saw the officer in my hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the reserve officer who recently shot a man. He said he was reaching for his taser and pulled out his gun by mistake and, killed a man in the middle of the street. And then they said the guy was refusing medical treatment. I don't think he was so much refusing medical treatment as he was freaked out that he had a bullet in him and they handcuffed him and he's probably freaking out and, moving and all this kind of stuff. And they said, we couldn't render aid, but he's probably freaked out that he shot him, a fleeing suspect. So these are the type of things that are going on. But after Ferguson, there's really no good that came out of Ferguson. Mike Brown is dead. Darren Wilson will never again have a normal life. You have George Soros funding, the rioters out there. So there's not a whole lot good that came out of it, but I can say that after that, these police departments, these sheriff's departments are on notice. They recognize they don't want another Ferguson to happen in their town. So when these officers do something bad, especially if it's caught on camera, they are now much quicker to indict the officers, arrest the officers, put them on trial. Because it used to be, they'll spend 3 months of taxpayer funds investigating themselves to find that their officers did nothing wrong. But now, thanks to people being quick with the cameras and other forms of accountability, these things are starting to slowly change. And let's talk about something that's slowly changing. Is my view of all these people, these global warming critics. Or I guess, hold on, let me backpedal here, because we're going to talk about Bill Nye the Science Guy. I love Bill Nye as a kid, but some of his recent comments in recent years talking about climate change. He was on MSNBC, and he said, don't call it global warming, don't call it global cooling, call it climate change. He was speaking to the Acre on MSNBC. He says, because some days it's colder than others, so if you talk about global warming, people won't understand it. And if it's hotter than normal and you're talking about global cooling, people are going to laugh at you. This is, of course, a paraphrase of what he said. So it doesn't really make sense to me because you guys probably recall the article, 2014, the hottest year on record. It came out at the beginning of this year, and people were all too happy to point these things out to you. But something that was missing from that report, 2014, the hottest year on record, with the exception of Chicago, Illinois, that was the coldest it was in 100 years, or Detroit, Michigan, which was also the coldest it was in over 100 years. So they like to leave these things out of their reports, conveniently left out, and then they come out with all these justifications to justify anything that they come up with. They want to talk about global warming. Meanwhile, you have the Great Lakes getting so cold they freeze onto the land masses, get so cold that you have icebreaker ships that are pretty much giant ice picks of the sea getting stuck in ice, and they want to scream about global warming. Or they want to talk about global cooling, and of course we know there are hot spots around the globe, but there are also cold spots around the globe, which in my mind kind of balances things out. And speaking more on this dynamic climate change, they say the climate is now worse now than it has ever been, which is to say, just to fill in the gaps of what they're saying here, when you can say something is definitively worse than it's ever been, that means they have gone to every continent and looked at every recorded natural disaster in human history and can now definitively say, after translating these things from every language, looking at every type of erosion and damage to trees and whatever else, they can definitively say they have boiled all this stuff down, put it into a digestible form, and can tell you the climate is now worse than it has ever been. Not to mention, things like the floods in the Bible or when fire rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah. But getting back to Bill Nye the Science Guy, you have Bill Nye and President Obama flying around on Air Force One, giving you a lecture about how you need to live within your means and how you need to reduce your carbon footprint. And we have the text, or should I say the tweet from Bill Nye, heading down to D.C. to catch an Earth Day flight on Air Force One tomorrow. With the president, we are going to act on the climate. So these guys who are telling you to lessen your carbon footprint, whether it's Bill Nye the Science Guy or President Obama or Al Gore, who has a house on the sea and a $30,000 electricity bill between all of his mansions. You can go look that up. I believe that was 2013 that was reported. They're telling you that you need to live within your means. And now we even see President Obama saying that people in Africa cannot have air conditioning.
Ultimately, if you think about all the youth that everybody's mentioned here in Africa, if everybody's raising living standards to the point where everybody's got a car and everybody's got air conditioning and everybody's got a big house, well, the planet will boil over.
And I had to slide that clip in there because I know there are people who wouldn't believe me if I just told it to them. So you have President Obama, and he's not the only one, Bush, Clinton, whoever else before him. They have taxpayer-funded Air Force One. They have these bulletproof, gas-guzzling vehicles. They can afford to send their wives and children on separate vacations, take the Secret Service with them to go do whatever with the prostitutes. They're burning up all this carbon, putting a very large carbon footprint on the planet. Meanwhile, they're telling you if you live in hot Africa, you can't have air conditioning because that would impact the planet too much. So I'm just pointing out what they're doing. And now they want to pass the carbon tax, or they've been wanting to pass the carbon tax to tax you while these people are living, I guess, within their means, but way above what their carbon rationing should be, according to their own statements. Let's completely switch gears now and talk about ISIS. We see ISIS when they're not receiving aid from U.S. and U.K. planes airdropping grenades to them. And then when they drop the grenades, I can't recall who it was. It's like somebody from the Defense Department. He said like one crate of grenades or one drop of grenades isn't going to stop the U.S. military, which is true. But it could hurt a lot of unarmed people who live in those villages and surrounding areas. So now you have ISIS who have AK-47s, they have grenades, and you have an unarmed population who have rocks and sticks. It can do a whole lot of damage to them. But I guess that's just collateral damage. And now we have ISIS destroying the ancient Christian cemeteries in Iraq. The Islamic State released yet another set of images of militants desecrating Christian history, this time shattering ancient graves in Mosul. And this was on April 16th. And we have the images there so you guys can see those on Infowars.com. And this is what these guys are doing. They're killing Christians and many other groups as well. These guys are running wild, and we seem content, just kind of sit back. And they say they want to, go in places like Syria and try to root these guys out. And I'm not a fan of Assad. I'm not cheerleading for the guy by any means, but we're funding our own opposition, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's when these guys change their name to ISIS and we drop them grenades and stuff. We're funding our own opposition. I cannot stress that enough. I know I talk about it every single week, but every single week they, come up with a new thing. We have to go out there and fight ISIS. Well, why don't we stop funding them? Like it'd be like a SWAT team giving guns to the Crips and the Bloods. Well, we have to go fight them. Well, like, why don't you stop giving them the guns and the drugs, and stop running guns into Mexico? But that's a different story.
Another major health threat, this one in Toledo, Ohio, where everybody in the entire city has been told not to drink the water.
Ohio's governor declaring a state of emergency.
Did you know that the average person uses about 80 to 100 gallons of water at home every single day? If there's a water emergency, will you be prepared?
Panicked residents forming long lines throughout the day.
We're here at a supermarket in Toledo. You can see the shelves empty where water once was.
To stay safe and healthy during a crisis, you must have access to safe, clean water. Water which will not be available at your local grocery store.
There's a mad dash on right now to stock up on supplies.
The ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system is a must-have for every modern, independently minded household. Protect your family's safety during an emergency. Go to InfoWarsStore.com today to purchase your ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system or call 1-888-253-3139.